All right, welcome to Now This Is Podcasting. I'm Connor, and I'm here as always with Calvin.
Hello.
And we have Katya with us again.
Hello.
And we are talking about Happening, not The Happening, that crappy M. Night Shyamalan movie. We're talking about Happening. This came out recently. It's a French film, and it's came out, I think, in kind of a perfect time. It's covering a controversial issue.
That's not really how I'd characterize it. I mean,
I would say a relevant time.
Relevant time.
Yeah, because, perfect implies that there's something good about it.
Okay, I suppose you're right. This is a pretty haunting movie that we saw it like a week ago, and it is like stuck with me since then. It's troubling, and
It feels like something from a barbaric past, and now it's a dystopian future.
Yeah.
Oh boy, that's a good way to say it.
The middle, yeah.
But this is directed by Audrey Diwan, and it's based on a novel by Annie Ernaux, and it came out actually. It premiered at the Venice Film Festival last year in 2021. It won the Golden Lion, which is the highest award you can get at the Venice Film Festival. And one of the judges on it was actually the director of Parasite. And it had won the award previously.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of cool that like those kind of that someone who had been a part of that group gets to kind of decide like the next winner of it, or be a part of that, and they kind of recognize that scene and the kind of film that's going through it. So this is not going to be a movie that most Americans are going to know about or talk about, and I was just glad we got to even see it. We saw it at a mall theater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How weird.
Of all and it finally happened. It finally happened. We had an entire theater to ourselves.
Yeah.
We finally found the most obscure movie
In the most strange place.
on the most uninviting day of the week to go see a movie.
Right.
We finally did it. Not at the sea.
I would have. My thought is it was going to be World's Fair, was where we were going to finally see a movie that like we would have the theater to ourselves.
See, that one I wasn't concerned about as much. I thought maybe The Humans.
Yeah. That was the first movie
Hatching.
I saw at the sea. That was great.
Yeah. I thought Hatching. Not happening.
Not at the Colorado Mills Mall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where we're going to get our own private viewing of Happening.
Yeah.
But yeah,
everybody thought we were there for, what was that other weird? There's a weird religious dude, Jonathan Kahn, that just came out with a new.
The Harbinger. That's the one that we kept getting confused for. When
Yeah.
I tried to buy a ticket too. They were like, "Yeah, The Harbinger," and I was like, "No,
Yeah.
no, the French movie about abortions. That's what
Yeah.
I really want to see right now."
Versus The Harbinger, which is actually a Christian eschatology, like about like how everything's falling apart, and the 9/11 terrorism attack was a divine warning to the United States.
We saw the trailer for that, and I was like, "We should review that just because it looks so crazy."
It is.
so
He is
crazy.
honestly one of the wildest religious figures that's out there. But yeah, I was like, no, I would never want to be associated with something so controversial as The Harbinger. I want to go see this movie.
Right.
About abortion.
Yeah, exactly.
So this had a budget. I'm sorry. I could not find a budget for this. Again, this was one of those movies that was really hard to research for because everything was just The Happening. Mm-hmm. It was really hard time finding anything about this. What I did find is like the box office. I want to say for its like festival release was at 1.4 million, and so that was what I found is it was prior to its theatrical release in the States. So like it's actually for what I assume is a pretty low budget movie, not because of its quality, just because of the style of filmmaking and everything. I'm assuming it's made its money back. It looked great. All right, so Katya, go ahead and give us what's the synopsis, the snappy synopsis of this film.
Our synopsis. Girl. Word she won't graduate college. Learns to knit.
It doesn't make any sense if you haven't seen the movie, but like that's like
Once you have.
it's very dark,
That's
snappy
exactly what
synopsis.
happens.
Yeah. It's sums it up. Yeah.
We
Girl
could-
learns new life skills.
we're
but not with New Life.
oh my god,
Yeah, stuff writes itself.
we're getting all our laughs out now because the remainder of this podcast
not
I think is
funny.
going to be dreary and dark because it's kind of like the tone of this movie. It's so let's get some first impressions out. Calvin, what do you think of this one?
What a wonderful way to shoot a film. I think the entire premise of this movie is when you have something controversial such as this, the best way to get across your point is to show how rules, laws, structures, societies affect individuals, and then give a story about their experience. And so that's what this is it's very unique in the way that it shot everything, the way you only have her experience reflected in the camera work. It is phenomenal for that reason. It's actually, I mean, I don't know about less controversial than I thought it was, but I thought it was going to be more about big statements. But I feel like that's more of an American thing right now. Everybody else is just kind of moving on with progressivism, or at least a lot of the major countries that this would have been distributed in. France, Spain is making a lot of progressive decisions lately. I think it's not as hot a topic over there as it is here. So.
Which is why I think this film is more relevant to Americans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's a French film and it's doing that, like, I watched this and, you know, there's everything going on with, like, this Roe v. Wade. And I just, again, this movie felt to come out in a really relevant time.
Mm-hmm.
I find it interesting that you brought up the way it's made, because when I went into this movie, I was expecting a film tackling a really important, controversial issue. The focus is going to be on just telling that story. And it's just, how do you convey the feelings surrounding this in like a clear and concise way? Mm-hmm. And so the point or the focus is not going to be like, what is my shot composition? What's my mise en scène? Am I going to have interesting camera work? To me, I thought this was going to be like establishing shot, camera set up in room, like very standard filmmaking. And I was completely taken aback by how this movie was made. It is entirely focused on the perspective of one character, and I don't know that I've seen a movie that puts you inside the mind of a character this well. And I was just really caught off guard by it because I had my own expectation going into this. I thought this was going to be like a movie that was made in a boring way but talked about something important. And so the fact that you add this whole element in of like amazing camera work that tells it drives the story to me. The camera work drives this story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it. This movie has like kind of lingered with me like for the last like week or so since we saw it. I thought it was fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved how the camera followed her, and it made everything so intimate. It made this so quiet, like this thing that she's going through. Yeah, you see it all on her. Everything's reflected in her. She's always nervous about who's gonna know, what's gonna happen, and I think that was the best way to put it in your head about, especially when they're talking about something which really they can't talk about. Like, this is something that no one can even talk about, and how do you show that? And I think filming it that way, it put us right there with her. And it was never about, like Calvin said, it was never about the politics or the law or religion or like any of the things surrounding this issue. It was just, she was set from the beginning, this is my decision, and this is what's going to happen, or this is like how I'm going to deal with it. So the whole thing was just about her and what she was going to do, what decision she was going to make, and how she was going to get there.
I think if anything, this film, or at least the character in this film, criticizes the healthcare system more than legislation or anything like that.
Yeah.
Because she like confronts her doctor and she was like, you know, I need help with this. And he's like, no, I can't do that. I'll go to jail, or you can go to jail. And then later on, when she tries to perform an abortion herself, she's like, you made me do this.
Yeah.
So I think while this is going to inherently tackle politics and legislation, what makes sense to me is the character is viewing it from, my provider is not giving me what I need. They're not giving me the healthcare I need.
But they also can't. She can't even ask for information.
Right.
From anybody, a friend, a provider. So I don't know. I think it's very closely tied up. I wonder how that works.
I don't criticize the doctor in this film. You know, I'm sure he has a family and his own practice and his own life to think about. But I thought that was interesting about it, is it wasn't a character going out and like, we need reform because I'm going through this. Mm-hmm. It was like the ire was focused on her her medical provider. And I thought that was why it was like an interesting take on this. Instead of, like Calvin said, it's not really tackling the issue at the highest level. Mm-hmm. It's tackling it at her level, which is what made this film so wonderful and so personal, like you said, Katya.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's the thing is it's really talking about the realities of what when you create a society like this and a culture like this and a political entity like this, what does someone do in a society? What options are available in a society where all options have been removed?
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's not saying the thing directly. It's very different than like an Alex Garland movie where it's just like,
oh, stop it. we just talked about Alex Garland's last film, so it's on your brain.
Yeah, I had a terrible vision.
Would you like to share?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna pass on.
But
this movie is almost the polar opposite of Men.
Yeah,
that movie has
exactly.
too many births, and this one has an exact point of stopping a birth.
This one has like 3 abortions, and we never see a vagina.
Yeah,
you're right.
That's so true.
Yeah.
That movie had 4 men giving birth, and we saw too many vaginas.
But yeah, I want to talk about the style here, like why it's so particular and why it's so interesting. The biggest thing, I guess the first question I want to present to you both is that I identified 3 main stylistic choices that they made in their cinematography, and I was wondering if y'all picked up on them. What 3 ones would you say like are the major ways that they composed their shots?
So my thought would be, you have the camera directly on Anne's face, and to me that's supposed to be her like lost in her mind thinking about the situation she's in. Then you have a second shot. A lot of the shots are over her shoulder. I'd say like 50% of the movie is over her shoulder, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, I don't think that happens till closer to the end. Like I don't think that's really at the beginning as much, is it?
I think
Or
it's
is
the
it all
whole
through
it's
the
the
whole
whole
thing?
movie.
Yeah.
Like even when she's dancing, there are scenes with it over her shoulder at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Walking down the pathway.
That's true. I think I think I noticed it more at the end when she was like, going into the classroom.
Right.
So I think like anytime she, like you said, if it's on her face, like she's lost in her thought. If it's like behind her shoulder, she's going towards like something unknown. And so,
I think it's like she finally has to acknowledge the world around her.
Yeah.
And so she can't just be lost in thought all the time. My third idea for the type of shot would be its use of focus. There are a couple scenes where, because the whole movie is about Anne, and there are a couple shots of her friends in the foreground, and she's in the back, but they're all obscured, and they're all out of focus. So that would be my third idea. I feel like this is a loaded question because you have some smart filmmaker brain.
Yeah, I'm about to shit on you.
And so
He's about to throw your ass over the tea kettle over there, Connor.
There we go. Yeah, if I had to pick 3 shots, that would be the 3 I did.
Yeah. Do you agree, disagree, Katya?
Oh.
Take a wild stab at the third shot.
No, I mean, those are the really... it's hard to say because I don't know your definition of what the
So describe
shot is.
describe the experience of what it meant, of what it was seeing something that you found interesting visually. Like, oh, that's an odd way of composing that shot or representing this event.
Yeah, honestly, I was a little... In retrospect, this is one that I like, but during it, I was a little bored. Because it was so simple.
Yeah, absolutely.
So not a lot stood. I guess the things that stood out were the shots on her face. Then it was behind her shoulder. It was cool, and the ones where it would move around, like the camera would change from in front of her face to behind her face. So those are the things I noticed. Scenes I liked usually had a lot like other people, like her family in them, and they're the more brighter scenes. So I don't really know where those fit into that.
And you're not alone. You're not alone, Katya.
Yeah.
I actually thought probably the first third of this movie, I was right there with you. I was like, this is really boring. And then once I realized they were really committing to a certain camera style, a certain shot to tell the story of this movie, it was like a switch went off in my head. I was like, oh, like this is so intentional, and like you don't film a whole movie a specific way unless it's going to mean something. But I agree with you. I thought it was like dragging a bit for probably the first third.
But you get sucked
I'm there
in.
with you.
I don't think I was thinking about it intellectually, but at some point I just settled in, and then I wasn't getting distracted anymore.
That's a good way to describe this movie. It's one that you got to settle into.
Yeah.
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 Okay, so Calvin, tell us
before you're jolted awake.
After that great, our great synopsis of the shots.
what is the third shot we missed out on?
Or
You're
all
exactly
three
right.
of them.
No, you're exactly right. All three of those are the exact devices that I was talking about. The only one that I would clarify is the close-ups on her face. I would lump that together with the idea that it is two shots that really comprise the whole movie. It's the POV shots, and it's her as the subject. So not just that she's dominating the frame or it's a close-up. She is in every single shot. There's not a shot that she is not in unless it is implied from her point of view. So that's very important. I think a very good example of that is when they're watching the boys play soccer and one of them comes over. And she's actually the furthest one in the depth of the field of that shot, but she's in focus with our eyes are only going to her as the one girl's wiping the bloody knee off of the boy.
Right. I think I told you this is like one of my favorite shots of the film when we left it.
Exactly.
Because I love the idea. It's like, it's not about them. It's always about Anne.
Yeah. And that shot only works that way if we've established this whole way that everything is from her perspective. And I especially love POV is one thing. Her as the main subject is one thing. I really, really love how they use depth of field in this movie. My favorite one was when she is getting into the shower and she's just standing there, and all of the girls in the shower are out of focus, but she is in focus, and we just see her back about like lower back up. That shot is very confusing. And very alienating to someone that doesn't understand why we compose shots like that, why we continue to hold that shot for as long as we do. And the reason is because it's this idea that the focus is a reflection of her awareness of her surroundings. She doesn't see these other people. It is not about the women being naked, because it's not a lewd thing. It's not like a voyeuristic thing. It's about how she is just sitting there completely naked, surrounded by her peers, contemplating what kind of autonomy she has over her body, and just completely wrapped in thought. There's so much said with just leaving that shot running a few seconds longer that other films don't understand. Like that's a really smart way of conveying points that people aren't going to understand. Like they think that she should probably get birthed out of a man 5 times.
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
Stop.
But it's fair. That's
true,
the trouble with how we record is we usually do like 2 or 3 movies, and so we always end up commenting on the other movie that we just watched.
Well, that was Calvin saying this director was smart is in direct opposition to his opinions on the previous
Yeah,
director.
Men,
yeah, exactly. So if you're interested in seeing Men, a little sneak peek of how I feel about that one.
Which is great. Listen to our review on that, and then we have a bonus episode out on that.
Yeah, that one was a lot of fun. I get really worked up in that one.
Yeah.
Because, we actually read straight from the horse's mouth how it's actually worse than we thought.
Yeah. So I kind of have a question for you guys. I think the phrase inside the character's mind gets overused. Like, oh, I really felt like I knew them. I really felt like I was inside their mind. I think this film is probably the best representation of that. And the reason I think that is, like you said, you have the shots which is just of her face, like she's the subject in the shot. And that's supposed to be, like, I think her time of contemplation. And to pull that off in a way with, I think what ruins that is by having dialogue and by over-emoting. But I think the actress, Anna Maria Bartolome, did it so well. Like, she is not over-expressing, because I think that's the idea of, if you want to quote-unquote get inside a character's mind, it needs to be that. Like, people don't over-express. People don't say how they feel. So if you can put together a shot on film that makes you think that you can know what the other person is thinking, like that's getting inside the person's mind. That's getting inside the character's mind. Understanding the turmoil and distress and the struggle they're going through, even on their day-to-day life where people try to hide that. I thought this movie did that so well.
Yeah. Yeah, and because her struggle is so internal and is so silent, it just all works so well together. Because she's quiet, she's there, and this journey she has to do just has to be quiet by nature. It has to be all her. Mm-hmm. Because, yeah, we don't get a lot of her. We get a sense of her drive, but I think, she doesn't explicitly share her drive. She just shares her desire for a fulfilling life.
Yeah.
And this is not in her plan.
Right, and like someone who, she can't even share it with her closest friends. She hints at it, and her best, like who we assume is like one of her best friends.
Yeah, they
it's like
masturbated in front of each other.
Oh my God, that was so wild, right?
I'm assuming they're very close.
But the one friend tells her other friend, like, hey, we can't even talk to her about this.
Yeah.
And so she's completely cut off. She's completely alone. And so I think those shots where she is the only thing in frame, and she's not overdoing it, she's not overacting this, like that really gives you a sense of like people know what it's like to hide something. People know what it's like to internalize a problem. Mm-hmm. And so to see that on the face of another, that to me is getting in the mind of a character. And I just loved how it was done in this.
Yeah, visually representing isolation through the shot selection, through the way that we frame the character and how we position her. That is a big part of why this film is so successful. Another reason that this is such a well-done film is it's all of the shots that you don't realize would normally be in a movie like this that are absent. The biggest one missing is establishing shots. There's not a single establishing shot of anything in the entire film. We don't know what the outside of a building looks like. We know like the door to the alley to the woman who gives her the abortion. We know that one. But otherwise, we don't know what the bar her parents looks like. We kind of saw the outside of Max's house, but it was as we were tracking with Anne. And then,
true.
Yeah, so absent are the establishing shots,
which I think is kind of jarring. Which I think is kind of the point of this movie, is to make you feel uncomfortable, and it should be jarring.
Yeah.
But that was one of the things I noticed too. Is it's like the scene just immediately switches to different location, different time.
Yep.
And there, like you said, no establishing shot. There's nothing to tell you what's going on. And again, I think that makes you really hold on to Anne as like the leader of this story. Is like you're immediately gravitated towards her and how she feels, because you're just thrown into a scene and you don't have any context for it. So the only thing you can grab onto is your subject on screen.
Yeah. And then the other thing too is we never leave her awareness, because we don't even get the narrator shots. The idea, the shots that switch between this is the character's perspective and what would be like your typical establishing shot is another type of that. An outside observer looking in at a person's experience. And a good example of that is like people giving her looks or something. She doesn't see anything that she wouldn't be able to see. So if she's leaving the class, we don't hang back and look at the professor giving her a look or something. If she has no awareness of it, it is not shown on screen. And that is really, really strange to do. It is hard to tell a movie because you can say so much more by doing that. Like if you get the sense of how other people feel about this character, it helps expand that character. So to limit yourself like that by only showing what they would be aware of would mean that you need to find a way to create a character out of just an awareness, which is hard to do, because when we're walking around as individuals, we have this continuity of the idea of who we are. There is so much about past us and future us and desires and all of those things. Like you need to build those implicit to a character and make them understandable. I actually think that's where this film suffers a little bit, is because I think a lot of the historical context is implicit, and it's not well explained what the ramifications are of a birth for a young girl without being married, and in what that household in that time period. We don't really know. We can assume.
What does this take place in the
1963 France. And so we don't know, without knowing their laws already, We just kind of have to project on that. But otherwise, I think it does a wonderful job because it moves you right along. You really walk with Anne, see things through her perspective, and get taken up into her drive and ambition for this task. And I mean, it brushes over the whatever moral implications anyone would have about abortion. It just assumes that in a modern day and age, this is something that we've all recognized as something that's important and something that if a decision is made, this is bodily autonomy, which I think is interesting, given the time period that it takes place where there were moral implications for it. But it's only represented by other characters' aversion to the topic.
Right. Because I don't think, like I said, I don't think the main character, she's not out there protesting. She's not a crusader for this cause.
No,
it's all so focused on her own personal story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like to that end, I mean, is this a political film? Obviously, it's a controversial topic, but is it political in nature?
I did not feel like it was political. It didn't feel like that from the beginning. It didn't feel like, because I think that was because she had made this decision, she was going to do it, and you were along there with her. It just felt like it was a non-issue, that this was just what she was going to do. But it's so hard to say, is it a political issue? Because there is a law against it, and we're in the middle of all of this political issue. So it's hard to say whether it is or not. I think it's a bigger conversation beyond politics on what women learn about their bodies and about pleasure and about what rights they have and autonomy they have over their bodies from the beginning, and how they treat each other and help each other through these things, versus necessarily this huge political thing, if that makes sense. It seems much more like this kind of more personal take on it, and this take that, you know, she knows what she wants to do. She's kind of figuring out how to do it, but she's being shunned by her best friends for it. They can't even talk about having sex all the time, but if there's a rumor that you actually had sex, you're a loose woman, or you might have an STD. Mm-hmm. And it's such they're all so in conflict with each other. So I don't know. It's hard to say. Is that political? Like what you teach women about their bodies, because it is what we learn. So I think that's I pulled more of that conversation out of it than the conversation of abortion specifically, even though it is about abortion specifically.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it'd be really easy for this movie to be bandied about as a social commentary or a criticism of legislation. But I don't think that that's what the filmmaker is going for. Mm-mm. I think because this is based on like an autobiographical novel.
I mean, from what I've read, it's almost shot for shot the book.
Right. And so if the writer didn't make it political and then the filmmaker doesn't focus on it being political, I would say that the focus of this movie is not inherently political. But I think that anytime you tackle an issue like this, someone will say something, someone will write some article, and it will have political implications. It will talk about the issues that we're going through right now. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that was the point of this movie. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. I don't care where you vote. I don't even care how religious you are. I think what makes this movie valuable is being able to put you in someone's shoes and being able to put you in a situation that you'll never find yourself in. Like, I will never find myself in this situation. And I found myself really caring for Anne. For an hour and 40 minutes, I wanted to know how this was going to turn out. And I wanted to know, is she going to graduate this prep school or college she's in? Is she going to have to deal... is she going to die from these abortion attempts? And I think that was the point of this. I think this is a really micro story that captures the implications of a macro issue. Mm-hmm. And that's
absolutely.
And that was what I pulled from it. So I don't think it's intentionally political, but I think it is certainly going to be talked about, and it discusses those issues.
You know, I think I'd actually change my answer then. When you put it like it's a micro expression of a macro problem, I think that's inherently political. I don't think it's a strong political statement. I think it's a demonstration of the reality of the systems you create. And that is a political statement.
This movie is so tough to describe as political or not.
Yeah, because I don't think
yeah.
like it's certainly not the reason of the story. It's
Right.
It's the central tension of the movie is her pregnancy. That certainly isn't political. It's what options are available beyond that, and how you grapple with the tension that's inherent in the story.
And even beyond that, though, so I think the main purpose of this is telling a story. It's telling her story. So what I mean is not only what options does she have, but who can she even talk to? It's like we're watching, and you guys are wondering what is going to happen to her. Is she going to live? Is she going to get to university? And then I'd say watching as a female in that time, or any time when abortion can't be talked about, you might be watching and thinking, what if this happens to me? Like, who can I talk to? Who can I ask? I can't talk to my doctors about it. They tell me to not ask. I can't tell my family.
There is a doctor in this movie that intervenes to strengthen the embryo.
Exactly.
Like, that's how like ingrained it was. That like, hey,
you
made this decision, live with it. Like,
and her friends can't help her. Yeah, you made it, live with it, and they're going to push their agenda on her no matter what. But I think, and after reading a little bit about the author and the director, it seemed a lot like they couldn't find these stories to kind of validate themselves or even start to make decisions when they were going through their own abortions. Like there weren't any other stories out there, right? It was something that you don't talk about, which makes you think that it's something that doesn't happen, or when it does happen, it's just happening to you. And it's your own thing to deal with. When it's happening to many people, you just can't find a community, and you can't even begin to discuss those things with each other about your own body because it's not allowed. But she could ask a man, and he could, ask around, because there's no implication for him, because he's not going to be the one having the abortion. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think more than being political, it's sharing the story to give people a way to connect and give them another just representation and another story of a woman and what could happen.
I think a really cynical take here too is that this is almost a perfect example for someone who's pro-life, because we don't really understand the context of her story. It seems that you could characterize her as very selfish, and the very reason that you wouldn't want, or the least desirable reason to have an abortion would be just whim, I think that there's a dark way that this can be twisted for people that are pro-life, that look, this is exactly the thing where we don't want, because we don't want women to very gratuitously abort things that could give life into public restrooms.
oh boy.
Yeah. I mean, that was the fact that
shared restrooms. Shared.
I do want to get
lodging,
into that a little bit later.
toilets.
But yes.
Yeah. So I mean, I wonder about that. If there had been more understanding, or at least more explanation of like the hardships that she would face, what the child would face, if that would have made this message a little bit more palatable, as in terms of like why all of this is so immediate, why it's so important to make a decision like this, and what ultimately drives a young woman to do these things.
I thought it was pretty obvious.
Well, I think that's the problem, is like
she came from poverty,
and
she's gifted.
Yeah, but from like a male perspective, it's hard to really put our to get in her shoes without really understanding. Like, yeah, I can understand. Yeah, she's smart, and like all of that's very like.
As soon as she told her teacher, her professor, it's a problem only women can have, or an ailment only women.
Oh, I love that line.
He just like gives up. He's
like,
not trying to get
it's
her
an
to study
affliction only
anymore.
women get. It
Yeah.
turns them into housewives. I was like, that is
So-
such a good line.
Yeah, that was a beautiful line. But yeah,
I don't know.
it's.
I
think
picture
like,
that as enough.
and that might be for a woman, and that's what I'm saying. Is like it's for me, it's harder to come around to, even though we see everything from her perspective, and we're totally in her head. I don't think that the emotional connection gets made, because we're so concerned on the visceral effects of of all of her decisions and how uncomfortable those things make us, that I don't find like a deeply moving or emotional affect from all of the way that we've decided to tell this story. So I was wondering if, I mean, obviously,
I think it's inherent in the fact that she's willing to die on accident over have a child and, you know, not get to do any of the things that she wants to do, or like
well, she says that too. She's
been
like
projected, and yeah,
she's like, I will hate this kid.
Yeah.
Because it will stop me from pursuing the future I want. And I
she's
actually
like,
kind of disagree with you, because I think a more palatable version of this movie doesn't move me the way that this film did. Like I really liked that it was visceral and it took you through the procedures that she went through. So my next question would be, are the abortion attempts necessary in this movie? There are 3 attempts. We see 2 of them. One happens off screen, and then we just kind of see the aftermath of it. That's kind of like the only weird time I think they got away from like that perspective, where I felt like if you continue it, I just wonder if they thought 3 abortion attempts were gratuitous for a movie. But 4 male pregnancies are not gratuitous for men.
I was thinking about it like by the 3rd one, she is so on her own. Like I just figured it was carrying that, like, we don't even need to see the Madame Riviere at this point.
Right.
She might not have even been paying attention.
How great is that character?
Abortion. I know. I loved her like scratchy voice.
Oh, it's so good. But yeah, so to me, the movie needed. I didn't want it to be palatable. I think the thing that made this movie impact me so much and really make me gain perspective that I didn't have was the fact that it was so visceral. And I know maybe that's not quite what you were saying, Calvin, but my point is more like it needed to be graphic, and you needed to have this procedure take place on screen. And I wonder, I mean, at least that's how I feel. Do you guys think that this is something that could have happened off screen? It could be implied, and then we just kind of see the character Anne afterwards. And is that enough to really drive home the point of this film?
No, and I think I should clarify. Like, I think that what I'm saying is, I think there's a cynical way that you could take all of these things, and this message would be interpreted the wrong way, because I do think it is necessary to show the abortion attempts. I agree with you. I don't understand why we don't show the 3rd. Like, we're very given over to the slowness and realism of living a life, of being in someone's head. And I love there's a quote by an Italian neo-realist director. Americans will show an airplane fly by once. We'll show it fly by and fly by again and fly by again and fly by again. It's the idea that real life cannot be imitated enough times to really give you a sense of what real life is, because you're talking about a movie. And I think that the closer you get, is the more abortion attempts you have. You need to show all of them, because it's like, it's a reality for her. It's even worse for the final one. So why not show that? Why do we decide there that that's the point where we've gone too far, or people aren't going to get it, or it's more uncomfortable, or it's too slow? That doesn't feel like the right. I feel like
after you show one abortion attempt, you shouldn't be worried about how uncomfortable your audience feels.
Yeah,
like you've crossed whatever threshold, and if you still have an audience like hooked on your story, then they're going to continue being on board, and you're going to lose people on that, and that's fine. To me, it feels like you didn't capture the point of this movie then, if you think that's all it's about. But I think I don't want to say it could use another abortion scene. I don't want to say that, but
I didn't find myself missing it. I was totally okay with that. Too.
So when I left watching Men, and that has weird multiple male pregnancy scenes, I didn't end that movie and say anything. I just watched the credits and got up and walked out. I think because we basically had our own private theater for this, when this film ended, I said, like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
It was a whole experience. And I think the reason I had that experience is because I got to see this several traumatic events through Anne's eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And how many times are we going to be able to see this experience? That's really the thing. It's really to drive home like why this type of healthcare is necessary is because there are consequences for women that do things to themselves. And the more available and easier we make all of this stuff, contraceptives, it's wild to me that there are laws being written right now to make contraceptives illegal, like criminal. That's wild.
It's all criminal.
Yeah.
Well, and that's
Abortion
mostly
will become a homicide, or
yeah, exactly.
murder.
But those
that one,
contraceptives are focused around female contraception, not
Yeah.
male. Well, then like
But also
condoms should
condoms.
become illegal either.
they are as well.
Okay, well,
But that's the thing. It's like
that's equality in the way I don't want it.
yeah, it's also like I don't think you guys are understanding like what you're saying. Like you're also about to imply that masturbation by men is homicide because you keep moving the line further and further back. Like where you keep saying it's just conception, but like now you're trying to prevent conception. So if you are engaging in acts that prevent conception,
Well, that's why
then it's
masturbation
murder.
is a sin.
Exactly.
Calvin.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Is like how are you gonna like actually enforce that?
Yeah, you can't.
Any act
it's all about
that,
privacy.
Any act that stops the creation of life then should be illegal.
Drinking Diet Coke. Prime example.
It's weird to watch a movie that takes place in 1960, and I think Calvin said it's like looking at history and finding you're in a dystopian future. Mm-hmm. It's like the same thing. Like, so this movie isn't, I think, trying to be political in and of itself, but it's just tackling this issue that is like wholly political.
Yeah, it's
and so
representing.
yeah,
it's representing an outcome that a politics has generated.
Like you can't help but look at it and think, wow, this is happening to me right now. And we're 60 years from that.
Yeah, because I think a good another analogy would be like, do we describe, all war movies then are political, but they're not seen that way.
Well, there was an interesting article with her, and there was a comment on that where they were saying like there was an issue with making a film about abortion from a director or from someone they're like, they're not going to like it up, in the politics or whatever. And they're like, well, I want you to say the same thing when someone comes and makes a World War II movie or any World War movie. Yeah. So just to underline that point, they were like, yeah, this is very much in the same thing.
Yeah. Where was the criticism for Jarheads or Saving Private Ryan?
Yeah, exactly. Saving Private Ryan was exactly what I was saying, because it's just a story about the effect that that decisions in systems placed on these people and what they had to go through in order to follow through in a system created by politics.
Yeah.
So it's not an inherently political movie because it's about these characters' experiences, but it is about politics.
No, I absolutely agree. And again, that's like the troubling question that you asked is it political? It's like, well, yes and no. It's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. It's like, well, it has to be political just because of the issue. Mm-hmm. But I don't think the story is political.
Yeah.
Which helps me just raise more and more questions about this movie. And it makes me think about it a lot more because I care about this character and I care about the political issues surrounding her that caused her to be in this situation.
Yeah. And I think that is exactly the point of the movie. That's the whole reason, like, there's a lot of like, little meta connections between when she's like, oh, I don't want to teach anymore. I want to be a writer, which is very interesting to think about. Like, then she wrote the movie that we're watching in the future of the past.
Yeah, it's like, whoa.
But that's exactly it. Like, now we're talking about it and it's very relevant today because those issues haven't changed.
It's so like, how are we doing the same thing decades later? It's like, it's troubling to me.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that is why it's important, because here is your past future and your future past. And if you don't do anything about it, it doesn't get better.
So I think you had the question is what makes this film special. And I feel like we've covered that. It's a telling of a really personal story that I feel like a lot of women go through in this country currently. And it doesn't matter that it's set decades ago. You can latch on to this. And this to me, again, I don't care what side of the argument you're on. being able to experience a story like this, maybe it doesn't influence or change your decision, but just being able to like grapple with it and watch it, that's what makes this movie special to me.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you agree, disagree. Being able to hear a real story and seeing it put to film in a very personal way, a very point of view kind of way, is what I think makes this movie so special. But again, I feel like we covered that.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to take thunder away from your question.
No, I think
but I think we bled right into that. And
yeah,
this movie is it is a special kind of movie. And like I said, the filmmaking drives every point of that home.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those movies that it drives conflict and it forces you to empathize with positions that you wouldn't normally agree with, understand, because they're not your life story. And I think one of my favorite quotes is from Charlie Munger, who is one of Warren Buffett's associates. And he says, if you don't know more than the other person in the room on a topic, you don't have an opinion. You don't get to hold an opinion. You're there to listen. And until you know more than the sharpest, most intelligent, well-spoken, knowledgeable proponent of the other side, then you don't know enough to actually engage in the argument. And I think that is exactly what this film is like, here's a slice of oppositional literature or oppositional experience to what a pro-life person would say, like being confronted with like, this is the reality of some of the things that you're doing. Like, you can say like, well, it's still a sin, or, it's still immoral, whatever. Like, there are still implications to all of the things that you do. And so understanding how these systems affect people is just going to make you a more empathetic person. And even if you still are on the complete total abortion ban, then you need to understand that there have to be other ways that we give women options and give women like the fact that everyone just wants to get rid of Planned Parenthood on the pro-life side, like that you don't understand that the function that Planned Parenthood has in terms of sexual health, in terms of contraceptives. All of those things are very important. If your whole goal is to prevent abortions, then there are other preventative measures that you can focus on rather than just blanket get rid of abortion. Like, you should be more concerned about other things. If you actually care about babies living good lives, then you should also be concerned with the women who are raising babies to have good lives.
Education and childcare, and
yeah,
you're gonna have to pay for all those things. You have to pay for abortion with your taxes.
There was literally just a vote on providing formula to mothers that every Republican voted against.
I saw that one. So part of the reason why like that one gets drummed up a little bit is they just had a problem with the implementation. What they wanted was the FDA to, there isn't a real shortage on formula. The problem is that the way WIC works is that it's a monopoly created by the providers of the formula.
Oh, but yeah, just WIC real quick is women, infants, and children. And you could look at this essentially the same way as like food stamps. It's a government subsidized way for mothers to get formula, nutritional food for their kids.
Mm-hmm. Well, so their problem is just the way that Republicans wanted to characterize it is they didn't think that this was going to be solving any of the issues. It was throwing money at a problem just for political points. The other one that they did all vote on is expanding the access to formula under WIC, which it makes a whole lot more sense. That's the problem. There is not a real shortage in formula. It's the problem that certain markets have a shortage of it because certain suppliers have been hit and their supply chains. And so because they're the sole provider of formula for that area's WIC, aren't getting formula to the people that need it, and they can't go and buy it from someone else because it's not covered under WIC. So there's a bunch of legal red tape there that's actually creating the shortage, and not because there's a real shortage in the actual materials. So that's why that one's a little annoying to me, is because
but that still doesn't help people who aren't on WIC and need assistance getting formula.
But that's the
I
problem.
think
That's
part of
the
my
whole
problem. Yeah.
That's the whole thing. That it's really only about Wick.
Right.
That's where the formula shortage is coming from. Is from all of the problems with Wick.
I appreciate you clarifying that for me. I don't want to put out like misinformation, but it's still just
It is silly. Like if you really like I understand they want to be fiscally conservative and they don't want it, and part of their thing is they don't want it to look like the current administration is functional and competent, and that's why. And there's a cynical.
no. They're doing
reason.
everything to make Biden look bad.
Yeah, which is it's weird because like
At
you
the
want to help.
cost of baby formula.
Yeah,
Like,
like you keep complaining about like the gas price gouging and like the Biden administration is like ruining it, and then you vote against that measure. That's stupid. Like that's exactly the problem you're saying that you're trying to fix, and you're deciding not to because you don't want it to look like the administration that you're running against is doing it well. So they could have thrown $28 million at the problem, and it may have or may not have been the right decision. But yeah, it is really silly in the light of like we care about these lives and we want them to live happy and healthy lives, but we're not going to do everything that we need to, even when it is an emergency. So I can understand the optics of it.
I think the tangent we've gone off on perfectly describes how this movie is political without intentionally being political.
Yeah, when I wrote that question, I was like, this isn't a political movie at all.
But I think it's like it's going to stir up discussion. I think it's going to stir up discussion more in France than it is here because, like we said, we saw this at a mall theater. No one was there.
Yeah.
But again, I'm glad we got to discuss this and like put this one out there. This is a movie that I think is important. You've asked me that question on like several movies, Calvin. It feels like lately.
Because we keep seeing important movies, I feel like.
Is this movie important?
Wants
And
to
I've
drive it
watched
home.
and I've watched a couple, and I was like, I mean, they're really good, but I wouldn't say important. Like, I think this movie is actually one that I would have my family watch. I would be like, you guys should check this out because it tackles a big issue in a really small way, and I think it's and that's why I think it's important.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough to just read headlines all day and hear about how bad things are, and feel like you have no way to combat that. But it's easy to watch a small story and gain empathy in that way. And you've talked a lot about that too. Is like a lot of movies are an exercise in empathy. Mm-hmm. Can we understand a character? Can we put ourselves in their shoes? Can we gain understanding? Mm-hmm. And I think this movie did a great job of that. All right, and with that, I think we're going to get into final thoughts. On a scale of 1 to 10 cherries, what would you give this?
Cherries. Are they popped?
I was referring to the cherries that she's eating out of the fridge. She's like stealing the other dorm mates' cherries out of the fridge.
I was waiting for you to explain it to Katya, so I'd be like, yeah, don't you remember?
I do remember. I'll give it 8.5 cherries.
8.5 cherries.
Tasty. I'd be like right there with you. I think I would put this at like an 8.
8.
And a big part of that is just like the filmmaking. I just loved how this was put together. I love how I got to understand, like really feel like I understood a character.
Yeah. And I think this is one of those perfect movies to exemplify what I talk about a lot. It's execution. It's such a simple idea. And how they kept everything so intimate really drives home how harrowing and horrifying this experience was. And you only do that by committing to a style that isn't influenced by like, well, we need to make this accessible to viewers. We need to sell more tickets and blah, blah, blah. And that's really my problem with American film is that there are too many hands in the pot. There's too many cooks in the kitchen trying to please too many people. And here you can see from beginning to end, it is one vision of how to implement an idea. And when it's done well, when you can see that from beginning to end, the idea was executed exactly the way it was and it accomplishes its goal. I think it can't be less than a 9. So I'm going to give it a 9.2, just because I feel like there's like some historical context, some social context that
It kind of relies on the viewer to know.
Yeah, and that's kind of unfortunate that it does do that, because it's so I don't want that to be the reason that someone gets pulled out of the movie, because otherwise it's very, very powerful.
If anything, I think what is going to pull anyone out of this movie or make them outright not buy a ticket is the fact that it's not in English, which again, I think we've been big advocates for that on this podcast. Is really good movies come out that aren't in English. And it's just unfortunate that if this had been an English film, I feel like it would have gotten a lot more hype, a lot more people would be talking about it. And that's part of why we wanted to talk about it is, this is something that's probably not going to come up all the time. And I wanted to get the story out. I want people to go and see this because, I just think this is a fantastic film. With that, we're going to wrap this one up. Thanks as always for being on, Calvin. And Katya, thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
And you can find our podcast on any platform like Apple Music or Spotify. We also upload all these to YouTube, so leave a comment. Tell us what we're doing well. Tell us what we're doing wrong. And if you have any suggestions for movies we should do in the future, go ahead and let us know. And with that, thank you for listening to Now This Is Podcasting.